The boy ran away from every family in the county. He stayed for the woman with the lame horse. The boy had been returned 4 times. Clyde Meacham read the note from the county orphanage agent while standing in his kitchen with his hat still on and his boots still muddy from the morning feeding. The note was brief and exhausted. The handwriting of a man who had run out of patience 3 placements ago. Thomas Gill, age 12, has absconded from 4 foster homes in 7 months. Strong, healthy, capable of farm work. Requires a firm hand and a patient disposition. Final placement attempt before institutional commitment. Clyde set down the note. He looked out the window at the empty corral, the fence line that needed mending, the barn roof that leaked in 3 places, and the general evidence of a ranch that required more hands than he had. He was 40, a widower, childless, and the kind of man who solved problems methodically rather than intuitively, which meant that when the orphanage agent had written to ask if he could take a boy, Clyde had considered the request the way he considered a fence repair, practically, without sentiment, and with a clear understanding of the labor involved. He wrote back that afternoon. He said yes. The boy arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the agent in a buckboard that pulled up to Clyde's gate and deposited a thin, dark-haired 12-year-old with sharp eyes and a jaw set so hard it looked like it had been wired shut. Tom Gill carried a canvas bag that contained everything he owned, and he stood in Clyde's yard and looked at the ranch with an expression that Clyde recognized immediately. Not fear, not anger, but the practiced, preemptive defiance of a person who had already decided this would not last. "This is the Meacham Ranch," Clyde said. "I run cattle. The work is hard. The food's decent. Your room is in the barn loft until I get the spare bedroom fixed up." Tom looked at him. He did not speak. "You eat supper at 6, breakfast at 5:30. If you need something, ask. If you want to leave, tell me first." He paused. "I won't chain you down, but I'd appreciate the courtesy." Tom picked up his bag and walked to the barn without a word. The first 3 days were a study in calculated resistance. Tom did the minimum. Fed the chickens when told, carried water when directed, swept the barn floor when he could not avoid it, and he did it all with a deliberate, insulting slowness that was clearly designed to provoke. He ate his meals in silence, answered questions with monosyllables, and slept in the barn loft with his boots on, ready to run. Clyde did not react. He had been warned by the agent that confrontation would trigger flight, and he had decided, with the same methodical patience he applied to training a green horse, to wait, not passively, but actively, watching, adjusting, learning the shape of the boy's defiance so he could work around it instead of through it. On the 4th morning, Tom ran. Clyde found him at noon, 6 miles south, sitting on a rock beside the road with his canvas bag at his feet and his chin on his knees, looking at nothing. He had not made it far because, Clyde suspected, he had nowhere to go, and had realized it about 4 miles in. Clyde pulled the wagon alongside the rock and stopped the horse. "You missed breakfast," he said. Tom did not look up. "There's biscuits in the wagon if you're hungry." Silence. "I'll be at the ranch if you decide to come back. Supper's at 6. He clicked to the horse and drove home. At 5:45, Tom walked into the kitchen and sat at the table without speaking. He ate 3 biscuits, 2 plates of beans, and a piece of cornbread, and then he went to the barn and did not come out until morning. He did not run again, but he did not engage either. He existed in a state of suspended hostility, present but unreachable, doing what was required and nothing more, watching everything with those sharp, wary eyes that seemed to expect betrayal the way other children expected supper. Clyde understood this. He had seen it in horses, the ones that had been handled badly, the ones that flinched when you raised a hand, because every hand they had known had been a weapon. Those horses could not be rushed. They could not be forced. They could be reached only through sustained, boring, utterly reliable kindness. The kind that did not vary, did not withdraw, did not depend on the horse's behavior for its continuation. So Clyde was kind, not dramatically, not demonstratively, but with the steady, mechanical reliability of a man who had decided to do a thing and intended to do it until it worked. He cooked meals and set them on the table. He left a wool blanket on the barn loft ladder when the nights turned cold. He asked Tom's opinion on fence placement and listened, actually listened. When the boy, surprised into speech, offered a suggestion that was, Clyde noted, genuinely good. He built the spare bedroom. He had been meaning to do it before the boy arrived. It was a project that had been sitting on his list for 2 years, perpetually deferred, because there was no urgency, because there was no one to sleep in it. Now there was someone, and the urgency arrived with a force that surprised him. He framed the walls on a Saturday, hung the door on Sunday, and spent Monday evening fitting a window that he had ordered from the mercantile 3 weeks earlier. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed and a dresser, but it had a window that faced east, and in the morning, the light came through it in a way that made the room feel larger than it was. He did not tell Tom about the room. He was not ready yet, and neither was the boy. The barn loft would do for now, but the room was there, waiting, and its existence was a kind of promise that Clyde had made to himself, that this placement would be different, that this time the boy would stay. 3 weeks in, Tom still had not smiled. Hazel Rourke lived on the next ranch over, a quarter-mile south on the other side of the creek. She was 28, unmarried, and she ran 40 head of cattle on a 100-acre parcel that she had inherited from an uncle she had barely known. She was competent, tireless, and quietly funny. The kind of woman who could repair a fence, cook a meal, and deliver a joke in the same 10-minute span, and who did all three with equal skill. She also had a horse named Birch who was lame. Birch was an old gray gelding who had pulled up lame the previous spring, with a strained tendon in his left foreleg. Hazel could not afford a veterinarian, and the local horse doctor had told her to put the animal down. She had refused. She had been walking Birch every day for 6 months, wrapping the leg, applying poultices, and refusing to give up on a horse that the rest of the valley had written off. Tom saw the horse on a Thursday. Clyde had sent him to Hazel's place to deliver a sack of flour he had picked up for her in town, a neighborly errand that served the dual purpose of getting the boy out of the barn and introducing him to the only person in the valley who might understand his particular brand of stubbornness. Tom rode over on one of Clyde's horses, left the flour on the porch, and was heading back when he saw Birch standing in the paddock. He stopped. He got off the horse and walked to the fence and looked at the gray gelding with an expression Clyde would later wish he had been there to see, because Hazel described it to him that evening, and the description made him sit down. He looked at that horse, Hazel said, standing on Clyde's porch with a cup of coffee, the way I've never seen a child look at anything, not with pity, with recognition, like he was looking at himself. Tom had asked Hazel what was wrong with the horse. She had told him, the tendon, the lameness, the 6 months of walking and wrapping. He had listened with an attention that she found startling in a 12-year-old, and then he had asked if he could help. I told him he could walk Birch tomorrow if he wanted, Hazel said. He said he'd be there at dawn. He was there at dawn. He was there the next day, and the next, and the next. Every morning, before his chores at Clyde's ranch, Tom walked to Hazel's place and spent an hour with Birch, walking the horse in slow circles around the paddock, checking the wrap on his leg, brushing his coat with a careful, thorough attention that made Hazel stop what she was doing and watch from the kitchen window. The boy who would not speak to Clyde spoke to Birch, long, rambling monologues delivered in a low voice while he brushed the horse's mane or picked stones from his hooves. Hazel heard fragments when the wind carried them. Stories about the foster homes, about the families who had given up on him, about a mother he remembered only as a smell, lavender soap, and a sound, singing, off-key, in the kitchen. He told the horse things he would not tell a human being, because the horse did not judge, and did not leave, and did not write notes to orphanage agents about firm hands and patient dispositions. Birch improved, slowly, not the dramatic recovery of a storybook, but the incremental, measurable improvement that comes from consistent care. The swelling in the tendon decreased, the limp shortened. By the end of the 2nd month, Birch was bearing weight evenly, and by the end of the 3rd, Hazel let Tom ride him, slowly, carefully, at a walk, around the paddock. Tom smiled. It was small and brief and startled, as if a muscle he had forgotten he had suddenly fired without permission. But it was real, a genuine, involuntary expression of pleasure that transformed his sharp, guarded face into something younger and softer and achingly vulnerable. Hazel saw it too. She was standing at the kitchen window with a dishcloth in her hands, and she pressed the cloth to her mouth and turned away, and when she turned back, her eyes were bright. Clyde saw it from across the fence. He had ridden over to Hazel's place on a pretext, returning a borrowed bucket, and he was standing at the gate when Tom brought Birch around the paddock at a slow walk, the boy sitting straight in the saddle, with his hands gentle on the reins, and on his face, for the first time in 3 months, something that was unmistakably, undeniably a smile. Clyde turned away so the boy would not see his face. Hazel was standing beside him, and she put her hand on his arm and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The change was not instant. Tom did not transform overnight from a defensive, hostile boy into a cheerful child, but the edges softened. He began to speak at meals, short sentences at first, then longer ones. He started doing chores without being asked. He fixed a gate hinge on his own initiative and pointed it out to Clyde with a casual pride that made Clyde's chest constrict. And every morning, without fail, he walked to Hazel's ranch and tended Birch. He asked Tom one evening, carefully, about the families he had run from. Tom was quiet for a long time, and Clyde thought he had pushed too far. But then the boy began to talk. The first family had been strict and cold, rules without warmth, correction without affection. The second had been kind but overwhelmed, 4 children of their own, and not enough room or attention for a fifth. The third had wanted a farmhand, not a son. The fourth had given up after 2 weeks, when Tom refused to attend church. "Why wouldn't you go to church?" Clyde asked. "Because my mother sang in church," Tom said, "and she's dead, and I don't want to be in a place where people sing and she doesn't." Clyde looked at the boy sitting across the table with his chin on his fists, and his eyes fixed on something that was not in the room, and he understood, with a clarity that felt like pain, that Tom Gill had not been running away from families. He had been running away from the absence of the one family that mattered, and every new placement was just another room where his mother was not singing. "You don't have to go to church," Clyde said. Tom looked at him. Something shifted in his face. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of trust, the first tentative crack in the wall. Clyde began to find excuses to visit Hazel's ranch. The pretexts were transparent, returning tools that didn't need returning, asking questions he already knew the answers to, offering to help with tasks she had clearly been managing perfectly well on her own. Hazel accepted these visits with a warmth that suggested she understood exactly what was happening and was willing to let it unfold at its own pace. They talked about the ranches, about the weather, about the boy, about other things. Her uncle who had left her the land, his wife who had died of pneumonia 3 winters ago, the particular loneliness of running a ranch alone, and the particular stubbornness required to keep doing it anyway. They discovered that they laughed at the same things and were angry about the same things, and that the silences between them, when they came, were comfortable rather than empty. One evening in late autumn, Clyde was sitting on Hazel's porch watching Tom walk Birch in the fading light. The horse was moving freely now, no rap, no limp, just a steady, even gait that spoke of months of patient, dedicated care. Tom was walking beside him, with his hand on the horse's neck, talking in that low, continuous voice that he reserved for the animal who had heard his secrets and kept them. Hazel sat down beside Clyde and handed him a cup of coffee. "He's not going to run again," she said. "No," Clyde agreed, "he's not." "How do you know?" "Because he's got something to come back to." He looked at the boy and the horse, and then he looked at Hazel. "So do I." She looked at him. The evening light was in her hair, and her eyes were steady, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a way that was not quite a smile, but was the promise of one. "Then come back," she said. He did. Every evening, after the work was done and Tom had settled in for the night, in the spare bedroom now, not the barn loft, in a bed Clyde had built with his own hands, Clyde walked across the creek to Hazel's ranch and sat on her porch, and drank her coffee, and talked with her, until the stars came out. On a cold evening in November, Tom came to the kitchen table and set something down in front of Clyde. It was a drawing, rough, unskilled, done in pencil on the back of a feed receipt. It showed 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a boy standing between them, with a horse behind them and a house with a chimney. "Is that us?" Clyde asked. "It could be," Tom said. He paused. "If you wanted." Clyde looked at the drawing. He looked at the boy, at the sharp eyes that were no longer wary, at the jaw that had unclenched, at the 12-year-old who had run away from every family in the county and had finally found something worth staying for. "I want," Clyde said. Tom nodded. He went to bed. And Clyde sat at the table with the drawing in his hands, and the fire crackling in the stove, and the quiet of a house that was no longer empty. And he knew, with the same methodical certainty he brought to everything, that the spare bedroom was not temporary, and the woman across the creek was not a neighbor, and the boy who had run away from everything had run, at last, toward home.